Hello, welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories taking place not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Bo-kyoung. Today, we focus on North Korea. Undoubted enemy. That is what North Korean leader Kim Jong-un called South Korea during a plenary meeting of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, which was held for 6 days to lay out Pyongyang's major policy directions. With North Korea clearly hinting that it would not stop provocations and threats by saying it would exponentially increase its nuclear weapons arsenal, tensions on the peninsula are getting worse. Why is this reclusive regime beefing up its military power so much, and how should South Korea react to it? We bring you in-depth analysis of the issue, and for that, we have invited Assistant Professor Chung Ku-youn from Kangwon National University on the line. Hello, Professor Chung. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Yes, and we also have Michiel Verhoeven, a member of European Parliament from the Netherlands. Michiel, it is a pleasure to see you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, let's get to the specific details of what Kim said. Professor Chung, Kim defined South Korea as an undoubted enemy and underlined that Pyongyang should mass-produce tactical nuclear weapons. What made North Korea call the South an undoubted enemy?
Well, it is a direct response to South Korea's action in the first place. South Korea marked North Korea as an enemy in its defense white paper last year and other government reports. But it should be noted that this term enemy appears in the North Korean official government discourse after the explosion of a liaison office in 2020. And this offensive attitude was further, I think, strengthened after the Yoon administration's policy of strengthening extended deterrence, increasing joint exercise with the United States, and trilateral cooperation with Japan and United States, which emphasize the deterrence aspect of North Korea policy. So it makes North Korea kind of change their posture from a partner to a kind of enemy vis-a-vis the South Korea.
Right, so from partner to enemy, right? Now, during the session, Mr. Verhoeven, Kim also called for more development of the North's intercontinental ballistic missile system and for the regime to launch its first military reconnaissance satellite. Kim's relentless intention to develop and augment the North's weapon programs does not seem to stop. What message is Kim Jong-un trying to deliver through beefing up this military pressure?
Well, I think with North Korea, we should always take a step back first and not just on what they are saying, but why they are saying it. Why is Kim Jong-un so open about his nuclear ambitions? And he's basically giving us a timeline on how, why, and when he is developing his weapons and his nuclear arsenal. Any other country in the world that would do these things would do so more secretly behind closed doors. So that's what I call in my book, North Korea is the nuclear streaker of the international community. Now, the reason why Kim Jong-un is doing this so openly is because deep down inside he feels threatened. He feels paranoid and insecure. His economy is crippled. As we see in China, the COVID pandemic is still far from over. And in 2019, he threw out a limb when he started negotiating directly with the US President Donald Trump. But he came back home with nothing, which was a huge embarrassment for him. So I think the regime and Kim Jong-un now believes that a stronger kind of rhetoric, increasingly testing weapons, continuing to provoke, will not only function as a deterrent, but also to ramp up tensions in order to increase his standing and his negotiating position in the global community.
Right, so he is feeling threatened because of the economic sanctions and so on. Now, Professor Chung, there was a ceremony delivering 600mm super large multiple rocket launchers to the military for deployment. While introducing this, Kim touted how this weapon can have all of South Korea in its shooting range and that it can be loaded with tactical nuclear weapons. What is this super large multiple rocket launchers and how threatening is this to South Korea?
Well, the parade has been kind of not usual, but it's kind of expected. Regarding those multi-rocket launchers, Kim Jong-un mentions that it is for the defense purpose last year, but now North Korea's approach has been changed. The background about this multi-rocket launcher is that like R&D, research and development of defense system equipment, requires a lot of money, actually. But North Korea, as mentioned, is less capable of defense than attack, and kind of under sanctions, which is incapable of kind of mobilizing money to develop that. So it is now focusing more on attack purpose kind of missile systems, concentrating on the strategy of maximizing destruction by shortest time. So that's a kind of background. But at the same time, it is actually threatening to South Korea. It says that it has the ability to overcome terrain mobility and the ability to perform surprise multiple precision strikes if it works very well. But at the same time, and South Korea is in the range and in the possibility of might tactical nuclear weapons. So it is a key offensive weapons of our North Korea's armed forces, carrying out combative missions, overwhelmingly empowering kind of North Korea. So it is still doubt. There's still doubt that North Korea's nuclear kind of miniaturization technology. But if it is possible, it can be very threatening to South Korea's military posture.
Right, so it is a threat that we should not overlook. Now, Mr. Hu-bin, it seems like North Korea has changed its route to indirectly pressuring Washington by warning South Korea of the possibility of actual action being taken. Is this North Korea's new strategy?
Well, in the United States and South Korea, we now have two new administrations. President Biden, on the one hand, in the United States, doesn't really seem to prioritize North Korea. He basically continues Obama's strategic patience policy, which means we wait for sanctions to work and North Korea to come back to the negotiating table to talk about denuclearization. But sanctions don't work on changing North Korea's behavior, and the problem will not go away by itself. In fact, North Korea never tested as much missiles and as much weapons as they have done in the last period. And on the other hand, we have President Yoon, who stated that negotiations with North Korea should first and foremost include denuclearization. So this is also a non-starter for Kim Jong-un. So I don't really think Kim Jong-un is changing his route from, on the one hand, DC to Seoul. I think he has just given up on having any concrete negotiations at all. So he now uses this time to rapidly increase his nuclear deterrent. But this also means that there's a much higher chance of an unintentional military escalation, and the chance of this has never been as big as it is today. So I hope that in 2023, parties will start focusing on de-escalation.
Right. So since Mr. Hu-bin brought up some of, South Korea's stance, Professor Chung, to North Korea's words and actions, President Yoon, too, is showing a strong sense, even saying that our military should certainly punish any enemy provocations with a firm determination not to avoid going to war. How do you assess South Korea's response against the North?
Well, the President Yoon's kind of response is largely interpreted in two ways. First, send a kind of a clear signalable resolve to the North to de-escalate the current situation. But at the same time, it wants to reassure South Korean people under the kind of risk of militarized attack from the North Korea. So it is, I guess, it is well responded. But what is needed after that is to prepare for the whole range of military provocation from the North Korea, ranging from the current multi-rocket launchers to the nuclear weapons, which will need more allied response between the United States and other regional partners. But at the same time, South Korea needs to be prepared by itself.
Right, moving on, Mr. Hu-bin, after unveiling the New Year's policy directions, Kim visited the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, the mausoleum of his late grandfather and father, as his first public activity this year. What is Kim's intention behind such move?
Well, to be honest, we don't know these things for certain. It's always a bit of a guessing game when it comes to internal policies in North Korea. And it's mostly shrouded in mystery why the regime makes these kinds of moves. We know that North Korea is always very calculative on how it's perceived to the outside world, but also on how it wants to be perceived to its own population. Not long ago, during the COVID crisis, I think Kim Jong-un missed a very important visit to the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. But for this year, I think that Kim Jong-un He laid out his plans for 2023. He also announced that there were hardships for the people. So I think now he's showing to the people by visiting the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun to show that he is still continuing his legacy of his father and his grandfather and the path that they laid out for him.
Right, so it is, though speculation, he was trying to, show that he is continuing the legacy. Now, Professor Chung, another interesting point is that Kim made another public appearance with his daughter, Kim Joo, inspecting missiles. This is third time Kim has appeared with his daughter. I mean, keep making public appearances with the next generation. How do you see this?
Well, some people said that it is pretty weird and very dangerous to, let their children to be sighted with weapons of massive destruction. But the more strategic purpose behind the scenes should be kind of understood. It seems like the strategic status of the North Korea, it insists, it required, is something that can be inherited to the children. That's a kind of message to the public, I think. The current military capabilities and legal codification of nuclear power and strategy last year, and operation of tactical nuclear weapons and multilateral launchers, all are kind of normal assets that make North Korea as a strategic status. And it is an asset that can be inherited to children so that the current Kim regime can be sustained. I think that's the kind of message that Kim wants to send to the international community.
Right, so sustainability through, passing on to next generation. Professor Chung, I need to ask you about the economic front as well. North Korea's escalating military tensions, especially through, firing more missiles than in any other year on record last year. Some say such move is to strengthen the solidarity of the regime itself due to the economic hardships the North is going through due to, sanctions and COVID-19. Now, do you agree with this? And how is the economic situation right now in North Korea?
Well, every economic indicator is pretty bad in terms of North Korea's context. And I agree with this argument that this kind of Central Committee's plenary meeting has a purpose of mobilizing North Korean people. As you can see from the latest Central Committee scene, it focused overwhelmingly on military aspects, strengthening offensive posture against South Korea, taking hostile attitude toward the United States and other regional partners. But it didn't mention about economy accomplishments. It has 5-year plans for a long time, but it didn't have any kind of obvious accomplishments since then. So emphasizing current situation as a threatening to North Korea's survival and emphasizing more military aspect of North Korea's strategy is another way to affect North Korean people's psychology to be mobilized behind Kim Jong-un's hostile policy in spite of economic hardship.
Right. Mr. Hu, I've been trying to look forward here. Now, according to satellite imagery by Planet Labs, the North seemed to step up military parade training, perhaps for, Kim Jong-un's birthday on January 8th or Military Foundation Day on February 8th. It looks like 2023 is going to be a big year for North Korea. What kinds of major events are scheduled for the reclusive regime this year?
Well, indeed, some big events are coming up. Which were already announced by the North Korean state media, such as an important military holiday, the 70th anniversary of the armistice of the Korean War, but also, most importantly, the 75th anniversary of the country's founding, and obviously the Korean People's Army. So I think these are very important days, and I think we should take a close look at what will go on during the upcoming year and during these days. But I would also like to emphasize on what Professor Chung said, and I'm also very interested on where Kim Jong-un in 2023 will take the economy and its COVID policies. Kim Jong-un announced many large construction sites and skyscrapers and new residential areas, but he also promised his people to improve the impoverished healthcare system. With all this military spending, sanctions still enforced, and his borders closed due to COVID, I wonder how Kim Jong-un will live up to the promise on improving the lives of the people.
Right, healthcare system and other, for example, like COVID-19 policies. Of course, we are all curious about that, but we cannot miss, the nuclear test. Lots of experts say there is a high possibility that North Korea is going to do a nuclear test, the 7th one, right? Do you agree?
Well, it has been.
Professor Chung, yes?
Yeah, it has been debated for a long time that North Korea will conduct a nuclear test, since last year, but they haven't done it yet. So I believe if they conduct a nuclear test this year, it might be the one that has some purpose. For instance, like test the miniaturization of their nuclear warhead or others, more technological advancement, and said that's the kind of things that might want to test. But for the strategic purpose, I guess, there are more ways to provoke U.S. and South Korea, I guess, like multiple launchers, missile launchers to the south, like Pacific Oceans. So there are more ways that kind of take the attention from the United States and South Korea and to be acknowledged as a kind of strategic status. So if they conduct a nuclear test, it could be a matter of context, as Hogan mentions. There are kind of many opportunities this year on more than 20 joint military exercise with the United States in the early half of this year. Another kind of joint military exercise between Russia and China, and the United States and other allies. So they may be kind of gazing the opportunity which can maximize the kind of repercussions of their nuclear test. So that's the kind of point I want to kind of make.
Right, going back to, Yoon administration stance, it seems like the Yoon administration's audacious initiative is not working properly. And I know what, Mr. Hu-Evan, you have mentioned that Kim Jong-un would never accept it, considering it as a bribe. Is such an idea still firm right now?
Well, as a more classic liberal conservative politician, I should first say that I like many of Yoon's domestic agenda, curbing big government, lowering taxes, tackling inflation, being pro-nuclear energy. But on North Korea, I firmly disagree with his administration. I'm much more in line with the previous administration of President Moon Jae-in. I think the audacious initiative is dead in the water. I mean, you can offer investment to North Korea. I think North Korea is always open to these kinds of proposals, but not when involving denuclearization. They will not come to the negotiating table. So I don't think North Koreans take it seriously. I don't think they have taken it seriously. And I even think that Yoon's own administration is no longer taking it seriously. North Korea wants to negotiate. I think it also sees that an unintentional military escalation is not in their interest. But North Korea just doesn't want to talk about denuclearization. And there are ample examples in the international relations that show that North Korea is right in that regard, that giving up its nuclear weapons is also giving up its fail-safe ticket to regime survival. So I think that the Yoon administration should re-evaluate its North Korea policy, should move away from this stance on denuclearization, but more start talking about de-escalation.
Right, so re-evaluation needed. Now, Professor Chung, for our defense, it is important to boost the alliance with the U.S. and Japan, but it is quite undesirable to have an arms race in Asia building up the military to tackle escalating tensions. What stance do you think South Korea should take to wisely deal with North Korean issues and provocations?
Well, the current Asia-Pacific region is already experiencing arms race, I think. It is not just about North Korea, but because of China and other revisionist countries in the regions that change the status quo in the current international system. So we cannot actually avoid, it is not avoidable at this moment, but at the same time, as you said, we should prepare for and be cautious about the risk of arms race. And when it comes to North Korea, I think it is very important to have a trilateral cooperations and identify different risk and different levels of risk coming out from North Korea. So in that sense, close coordinations and communication with three countries are very important. And I think that makes North Korea's provocations and further development of military capability will be very costly. So that's the kind of whole point of trilateral and allied response to North Korea. I think that's the kind of Yoon administration is currently focusing on.
Right, Mr. Hu-Evan, since you're a member of the European Parliament, I would like to ask how the European community is looking at the Korean Peninsula situation right now, and how is the European Union seeing North Korea's actions?
Well, in Europe, European politics, North Korea is not very high on the agenda. Unfortunately, there are other priorities, such as the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis that follows, high inflation. So the European politicians are not very active in this regard, mostly following the United States by abiding to the sanctions, by also condemning, rightly so, North Korea's provocative policies and testing. But I do think that the European countries are not using their so to say, unique selling point when it comes to the Korean Peninsula. I think that many European countries have diplomatic relations with both the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So I think that European politicians should be a bit more active and also try to create a more independent platform for talks about de-escalation, peace talks, and try to reach out to also to the North Korean diplomats in order to at least initiate some talks, because there are virtually no talks at this very moment.
All right. Unfortunately, this is all time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Chung, for your insights, and thank you, Mr. Huibin. It was a pleasure to have you with us. We appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Have a great rest of the evening, and we will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories on the issues happening in South Korea and, of course, around the globe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.